Hello gardener, welcome to my channel. April is here and the garden is shifting into full gear. This is such an exciting month as spring really starts to pop off and we begin transitioning into our warm season crops. April is all about staying ahead, whether that's pests, irrigation, or the blazing heat that's just around the corner. If you're new here, hello and welcome. My name is Jara. I've been gardening all of my life and I'm a professional seed and plant nursery. I love to share my knowledge and teach others how to garden and grow food, so you've come to the right place if you want to improve your gardening skills. And don't forget to watch my April garden guide, which lists over 40 crops to plant right now in April for lots of planting inspiration. I'll link that video below. All right, let's dive into these 10 essential tips for gardening in the month of April. Tip number 1, April is prime time to direct sow your warm season favorites like beans, cucumbers, squash, corn, and melons. The soil is finally warm enough for good germination, especially if it's consistently above 60 degrees Fahrenheit. If you're in a warmer zone, go ahead and succession sow these crops every 2 to 3 weeks to stagger your harvest into early summer. I prefer to direct sow as much as possible to reduce the amount of seedlings that I have to baby and take care of to grow my own transplants. There are some crops that have very specific requirements in order to germinate, like celery, for example. The seeds require light to germinate. So in those instances, sowing seeds indoors so you can control the environment better is the best way to go. But for the majority of warm season crops, direct sowing is the easiest way. Tip number 2, it's Eastern Lubber grasshopper season. This giant colorful grasshopper eats the leaves of a wide range of plants and are very destructive. They appear in springtime in the southeastern parts of the United States. The best way to get rid of these grasshoppers is to kill them while they are still very small and black, which is their nymph stage. Catch them early, squish them, vacuum them up, or spray with spinosad. If you wait until they become full-sized lubbers, they'll be nearly impossible to kill and they'll chew up your entire garden in just a matter of days. I don't get them here in my personal garden, but I do get them at my second garden on my aunt's property. They tend to congregate on her lily types of plants, especially amaryllis, so we catch them off from those plants before they spread to the rest of the garden. Tip number 3, get ahead of the summer sun and lay down mulch right now. A 2 to 4 inch layer of organic mulch like straw, wood chips, or shredded leaves helps cool the soil, lock in moisture, and reduce weed pressure. If you're in a hot climate, this step is essential to get your garden through the next few months with as little plant stress as possible. Stressed out plants means lowered immune systems and they become easy targets for pests and diseases. Tip number 4, don't wait until your cucumbers, pole beans, and melons are scrambling all over the ground before you finally get around to setting up your trellises and supports. It's so much easier to do this before you start direct sowing the seeds or transplanting them into the garden. I can't tell you how many times I was like, I'll do it later, and then when I finally come around to it, the plants are all a big tangled mess. Plus, the longer that they are in contact with the soil just means more time for the pests and diseases to get up on them. I try to grow everything possible vertically if I can because it saves space and improves air circulation too. I have a step-by-step tutorial showing how I build my trellis systems, which I will link below. Tip number 5, if you've got dense patches of seedlings from March or early April sowings, it's time to thin them out. I know it can be hard to pull up healthy baby plants, but trust me, overcrowding leads to weak, leggy growth and poor yields. Thin to the recommended spacing on your seed packets and compost the extras or transplant them somewhere else if you have the room. This is especially crucial for root crops like carrots. If they don't have enough space, the roots can't expand and get as big as possible. Take a look at your spring plantings and start thinning where needed. Tip number 6, if you haven't already, April is a great time to start your own compost pile or bin. Garden waste, kitchen scraps, and spring weeds can all be turned into compost for your garden. It is important to have a good ratio of green material like veggie scraps and grass clippings with brown material like dry leaves and cardboard for it to compost properly. Keep the compost pile moist and turn it every couple of weeks. To speed things up, cover the compost pile with a tarp or plastic so it heats it up. The hotter your pile, the faster it will compost. Tip number 7, powdery mildew, which is a fungus, is going to start spreading around the garden, so be prepared. It always hits my cucurbits first, like squash, cucumbers, and melons. A lot of these crops, especially squash, have a natural silvery variegation to the leaves, which is normal, but if the leaves have a thin white layer of dust on them, it's powdery mildew. Remove heavily diseased leaves by pruning them off the plants, then spray with 1 cup of 3% hydrogen peroxide per gallon of water to clean and disinfect. There are actually several treatments for powdery mildew, but hydrogen peroxide is my favorite. Repeat this spray every 3 to 5 days until you notice a reduction in powdery mildew. Tip number 8 goes along with plant disease management, and that is to be consistent with your fertilizer regimen. Create a fertilizer schedule. Fridays are my fertilizer day. I call it Fertilizer Fridays. For most crops in my garden, especially the cucurbits, I like to fertilize with small doses of an organic granular fertilizer, like 1/8 1/8 of a cup every week to keep the nutrient supply consistent and encourage rapid growth. All of this growth will help outpace the diseased growth, especially after pruning. Other great fertilizer options include compost tea or fish emulsion. Whatever it is, just make sure it's organic, because if you fertilize this often with a synthetic fertilizer, you risk burning your plants. Tip number 9, April is a wonderful time to divide and propagate perennials like chives, lemongrass, mint, oregano, daylilies, and ornamental grasses. This helps keep them vigorous and allows you to expand your garden without having to buy new plants. Give away extra plants to friends or donate them. After dividing your plants, put them in a shady spot and make sure the soil stays consistently moist to prevent as much transplant shock as possible. And my last tip, tip number 10, if you're in a hot climate, now's the time to start planning how you're going to provide some shade to crops like tomatoes, peppers, and leafy greens. Some shade during the hottest time of the year will help these crops last a little bit longer. Use 40% shade cloth, row covers, or taller companion plants to provide some relief from the intense afternoon sun. This can prevent sun scald on fruit and extend the life of cool-loving crops into early summer. Last year was the first time I put shade cloth over my peppers, and I saw a huge difference in their health. It still was too hot for a lot of them to continue producing, but at least the plants looked pretty happy and survived until fall when temperatures cooled back down and then they started producing again. So if you're planting these kinds of crops right now, put them in a spot where you will be able to install shade cloth later on. And there you have it, 10 garden tips for the month of April to keep your garden healthy, productive, and thriving as we roll into the warm season. Whether you're planting, mulching, or squishing down lubbers, April is a great month to get things in place for a strong summer garden. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a big thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more garden guidance. Happy gardening, and I'll see you in the next video.